a lot of really deep dive questions that when you read them, you want to answer them completely. So don't try and fill it out in one sitting. It really is something that you have to do a bit of introspective gaze. You got to walk with it for a while, look at it, and be kind to yourself. I mean, that's the other thing is like, be kind to yourself in going through a process that is going to unearth a lot of things that you probably have hidden and that you have probably tried to turn around from. You have to directly look at it because you have to directly communicate it.
Yo, what's up? It's Joshua Johnson, otherwise known as Former Inmate number 305178. I got the homie Cam Beats with me over in the Pardon Me corner. What it do, Cam Beats?
Yo, it's Cam Beats, non-inmate number 0.
For all of you that follow the Pardon Me podcast, you know that Cam Beats confesses or he professes every episode that he will never go to prison, nor does he have a desire to go to prison. But I appreciate the fact that he's inquisitive and likes to provide context.
Inquisitive because I am curious, not because I want to know and be prepared to enter those corridors.
And we appreciate that, man. I don't ever want to go back either, so I'm there with you. A couple things before we get started. We have a very special guest today, one of our first guests, or actually the absolute first guest that we've had that has not received a gubernatorial. That's a fancy word. I learned that from the teacher, Cam Beats, gubernatorial or presidential pardon. We have Megan Morrisey here with us today, and we're really excited to have her here to share a conversation around pardons. And she's even going to break down the difference between an expungement and a pardon, because I know many people always ask that question about what they are. Before we jump into the interview, we first got to give a shout out to our sponsor, Be Clear Water.
All know and love our premier alkaline water that's wrapped in sustainable packaging. Well, welcome the new kids on the block. Our watermelon mint and elderberry lemonade are packed with vitamins. It's great tasting and refreshing without the artificial flavors and colors. Life's confusing enough. Let's be clear.
Taking a sip of Be Clear water is like taking a sip of water from heaven.
One thing about it is it's room temperature is still
good.
It's still a good temperature.
It is.
It's not like warm.
No, it's not. Yeah, it's really good. It's really good, and it's nice and cool in this aluminum packaging. So definitely shout out to Be Clear Water. Thank you for sponsoring the Pardon Me podcast. Nurse owned, family owned, veteran owned. We appreciate your support. Let's jump into our show. This is I've been looking forward to this show. Before I even let Megan say anything, I have to give Megan a huge shout out. When I went for my pardon back in May of 2022, when I got the notice that it was on, like the next couple days, they send you the email. Governor Evers' team sent an email, and I got it. And I'll be honest, I was frozen. I'm like, oh my God, what do I do? One of the first people I called was Megan, and you all will understand why I called Megan as Cam Beats reads her bio. She's one of the first people I called, and I'll be honest, after calling you, I felt like at ease. It was much easier of the process that I was going to go through because I was, as you remember, my thoughts were scattered all over the place, and we could talk about that during the show. But before we even get started, I want to say thank you for that. I attribute you to me going in front of even though it was virtual, I attribute you to giving me some nerves of steel in front of that. So thank you very much.
You did a great job.
Thank you.
I watched it. I was rooting for you the whole time.
I appreciate it.
So typically we start our show with me reading the actual pardon of one of our guests. But because you don't have a pardon, I can read your background and your bio. So we have Megan Morrisey, and she's the Director of Mission Integration at Goodwill Industries of Southeastern Wisconsin and Metropolitan Chicago. In this role, Megan oversees the strategic development and implementation of mission integration in Goodwill, with a focus on creating employee programs and services, including, but not limited to, financial education, access to internal and external community resources, personalized training, and developing efforts to reduce barriers to sustainable employment and prosperity. Megan has dedicated her career to serving individuals caught in legal and social systems by assisting them with navigating and effectively problem solving their way to a just resolution. As a public defender, she represented individuals at all levels of criminal prosecution. During her during her tenure teaching, Megan guided students and adult learners instructing evening courses at a local technical college and eventually teaching as an adjunct professor of law at Marquette Law School. As the coordinator of the Milwaukee Justice Center Mobile Legal Clinic, she developed clinics and partnerships in communities to increase access to legal resources and established the Expungement and Pardon Clinic during her time there. Megan regularly presents in the community of Wisconsin's pardon process and other conviction removal opportunities. Megan is a community anchor, educator, and advocate dedicated to improving the lives of many with a focus on improving and supporting growth of people and communities. Welcome, Megan.
Welcome, Megan. Man, Tommy, I can't be. That was almost like reading the pardon, reading the proclamation.
Right.
Only thing missing was the statute citation.
Whereas,
or we found out with the presidential one, it was just like you
pardoned.
are pardoned.
It was 3 sentences. Like that.
Yeah.
Signed.
25-page application.
Yeah, and then it's your pardon. So, welcome, Megan. I'm going to kick it off with the first question here. We like to keep it conversational here on the Pardon Me podcast. Could you share with us your journey and what inspired you to dedicate your career to serving individuals caught in the legal and social system?
Yeah. Honestly, it started when I was fairly young. I remember in undergrad, I was going to school, UW-Madison, and I was going for behavioral science and law, criminal justice. I actually originally thought going prosecution side, going possibly even FBI, law enforcement of some sort. And I think it was my junior year summer. It was the summer. I did an internship at a public defender's office up in Marathon County, Wausau, Wisconsin. And I was immersed within a public defender's office, and I saw the passion, I saw the dedication, I saw lawyers that went above and beyond in representing their clients, but also humanizing them, as well as just being a fierce advocate in the courtroom. So that gave me a different perspective, gave me a different inspiration. And at that point, I was thinking, no, I like the storytelling. I like getting in there. I like really humanizing what occurred from the perspective of an individual who often is, and in that moment, often is villainized, right? They're needing an advocate, but more importantly, we want to make sure that the process is happening correctly and that all of the laws are being followed. So that led me then, I took a year off between undergraduate and law school, and I worked as an investigator at the Legal Defense Project, which was a clinical program at UW Wisconsin's law school. And I worked there for a year and really got into the intricacies of building a case. What does that mean? What does that look like? How important is it to do a proper investigation? And I did that until I eventually then went to law school in Madison at Wisconsin's law school. And there I, again, fully immersed myself in criminal law courses, criminal law clinics, anything related to just learning about the criminal justice system. Mm-hmm. And part of that was also applying and being accepted into the Innocence Project after my first year. And I would say what really, quite honestly, solidified my idea of becoming a defense attorney was working at the Innocence Project and meeting individuals who had claims of actual innocence. But one particular gentleman who I participated on his case was Evan Zimmerman. And he was convicted in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, of a homicide that he did not commit. And so in representing him with a team of individuals where we were law students and lawyers from the community, but also law professors all working together as a team, most literally, we were extremely dedicated and passionate about freeing Evan. And we were ultimately victorious in that. And
nice.
Yes, ultimately, he the case was dismissed against him, and he was able to go home and be free. And so that's something that, of course, working in a collective as a team, in setting what was such a tragic wrong, really instilled upon me how things can just go completely sideways if there isn't somebody in the courtroom to make sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
I always share that I became what I would consider a diligent lawyer from Evan's case, most literally reading how things can go absolutely haywire. So that was, again, I think a large influence in me kind of raising my hand after graduating law school and saying, put me in, coach. I want to go to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So I did everything I could to eventually become a public defender in Milwaukee County. And I was in Racine for a year. So I went down to Racine and had an interesting time learning the court system there and practicing in a different types of law, and then it came up that there was a position available in Milwaukee, and I put in for the transfer, and then ended up doing 10 years up here in Milwaukee County.
Wow. So when you think back to the Innocence Project, so I don't know, Ken, if you're thinking about it like I was, like we see the movies that come up and they like, is it really like that? Like the lawyers are like really, I mean, there's stacks and stacks and boxes of stuff that you have to go through, and you're really like just trying to find that needle in the haystack that'll prove the innocence of someone.
Yeah, actually, there were 12 banker boxes in Evan's case, and those were the first boxes that we had. There were 12.
Wow.
And you have to go through and pull every page, read it, because again, there may be that piece of information that is, just it can set you off on a whole new line and theory of investigation, or it could really be the key, right? Evan's case, they actually did make a movie about it. And
really?
Yeah, it's Evan Zimmerman, Facing Life. It was a documentary. An outfit from Chicago came up and connected with the law school and said, hey, we want to, videotape and make a movie of a case that's going on. And lo and behold, the retrial of Evan was going to happen in 2 weeks. So they came for the journey and recorded just that roller coaster as a whole team that we all experienced. And certainly Evan's journey, which of course, being innocent and being in prison and then getting your chance for freedom, again, definitely solidified my decision to become a defense attorney. But I think kind of full circle, it's now brought me to this area where my area of expertise and the area that I've gravitated towards is, again, that fight and that focus on second chances, but also conviction removal.
Yeah, and that kind of leads into my second question. Like, and I think you laid a great foundation of like where your passion comes from. Getting it. I mean, you the innocence. Like I said, I see that on TV, and I'm like, wow, I can't even imagine. Like, I've sat in prison, guilty of what I did. I cannot imagine the feeling of being in there and knowing I did not do. I honestly can't. Like, it gives me chills to my body to even think about like how that could happen. So
before you go to the question, how do you get cases? How do you even get the innocence cases? How do they make it to you?
Yeah, very good question. So you can go online. They have an application through University of Wisconsin's law school. You can write and submit a request to be considered. But a lot of times they come through the state public defender's office. If there is an appellate case that looks to be a claim of innocence, they will contact the law school and see if maybe that's a case that the Innocence Project would want to take up. But I imagine they probably have more requests than they can probably, I think, represent on, but a lot of it boils down to criterion too. So I think they at least when I was there, they weighed some of the criteria was that how long had time passed, was the person still incarcerated. That was one factor. There were a lot of individuals that again may have wanted a pardon or wanted to be redeemed of the conviction, but were out. And the Innocence Project focus was definitely on individuals who were in
Mhm.
because of the significant
Yeah.
eminence of that.
Okay.
Can't be you trying to find out in case you go in for something being innocent for.
If there's an out clause,
Alive. Yeah. You trying to make sure. I feel you.
right. I mean, it sounds like a pardon process to actually be selected for
It
the Innocence
does.
Project. Like, hey, I have to have a compelling story that actually sounds like something that's able to be.
Well, it's not just a story. I mean, I think, it's really looking at, the evidence and looking
Mhm.
at, is there something there? Was there something that that they can write to get a retrial?
Mhm.
Certainly there's certain bases that you use to get a new trial or to overturn a conviction. So, you really need a team.
Isn't the
Definitely a
Innocence
team.
the program? Is that the one of the first in the country? Is that the first in the country here?
It's one of the first. I would
Mhm.
imagine it was based off of Barry Schneck and Peter Newfield's
Mhm.
their work I believe they were in Cardozo at the Cardozo
Okay.
Law School. But yeah, it was one of the first Innocence Projects set up in the country.
Gotcha.
I love it. Yeah, this is this is new territory for us as we're talking about, like on the Pardon Me podcast. This is great. This is good stuff. Great context to the conversation. I think it really does lend into where your passion comes from and why you really want to see folks succeed and support. And that leads directly into my next question, which is, your work with the Milwaukee Justice Center and the Mobile Legal Clinic and the Expungement and Pardon Clinic. It greatly increased individuals' access to legal resources in the communities. What motivated you to establish those clinics and to work at those clinics, and what outcomes have you observed? Like, and I know one other question I'm going to ask, because I know you have to have some success stories, so I can't wait to hear those. Like, when you established that, like, what motivated you to kind of establish, like, to get those moving and to do the things you were doing?
So at the Mobile Legal Clinic, which had already been set up, I started working there in delivering civil legal aid, and most literally taking a bus of lawyers and law students into communities to really bring the law and lawyers to people. So we partnered very heavily with the public library system, being that they are very localized in neighborhoods. They have very good parking lots as well, so we could park a bus on a pretty nicely graded parking surface, as well as having computers, bathrooms, a nice place, a welcoming place, a secular place for individuals to feel welcome. Most people know where the libraries are in their local communities, and so it was a very centralized place to meet up with folks. In delivering civil legal aid through the Mobile Legal Clinic, it was a common theme that would be brought up. Individuals would come and they may have a civil legal aid question, and then they would ask questions about, oh yeah, and I have this on my record, or I have this, and I'm not able to, I wasn't able to get this apartment, or there were all of these barriers that seemed to be anchored in the fact that the individual had something in their past that they still were carrying with them. And so it was at that moment that I was like, well, my background is as a criminal defense attorney. We have law students who are extremely, passionate about this as well, and eager. And we have a whole bar of lawyers who I think are very much also committed and passionate about it as well. So starting the Expungement Pardon Clinic was honestly kind of a no-brainer. And it was one that I'm very proud of, and it's still continuing. But yeah, it really was something that it was a common theme. It resonated with a lot of individuals. And of course, the Mobile Legal Clinic and the Milwaukee Justice Center, they don't represent on criminal matters, but conviction removal, expungement pardons is administrative.
Yeah.
So there was that availability for me to, lay the foundation for this clinic, with the understanding that this isn't a pure criminal case. It's been litigated, it's closed. We are looking at, in the world of expungement, we're actually looking at the and I'll explain the statute, but we're looking for the enforcement of the expungement order.
Gotcha.
And in a pardon case, that's an executive decision, right? It's created from Article 5, Section 6 of the Wisconsin State Statute, gives exclusive power and discretion to the governor to create a pardon board that is basically an executive order. So it's outside of the courts.
So when you think about it, so I have two questions actually as a follow-up there. Can you tell me the difference and tell the viewers the difference between an expungement and a pardon?
Yeah. Yeah. No, and this is key. So expungement, I'll start there because that's at this, it's codified, it's a statute, it's 973.015. It is a statute that I think a lot of people think about, talk about, but the intricacies of it they're very, very particular, and very, very limiting. So most literally, it has to be a offense or a conviction of an offense that the maximum penalty is 6 years or less. So what that means is in the realm of felonies, it's a class H felony or I felony, nonviolent. So it's a nonviolent H, nonviolent I felony. They're lower level. They tend to be more like passing a bad check. So, and then misdemeanors. Most all misdemeanors qualify as the statute is drafted currently. So that's the first sort of criterion. The second one is that at the time of the offense, so not at the time of the conviction, but at the time of the offense, the individual has to have not obtained their 25th birthday. So they have to be, how I've explained it to individuals is you have to have not blown out the candles on your 25th birthday cake, or 24 and under is really what it turns out to be. Similarly, one of the other criterion is that the judge at the time of sentencing has to determine if you are eligible or not for expungement.
At the time of sentencing.
Yeah. So when you are there and you are in essence asking for the court's mercy, their forgiveness and leniency, and they also have a prosecutor there who is arguing typically for the opposite, as well as potentially victims and or other interested parties. And it's in a public setting. It's, the finality of this particular case that's been journeying through the court system. And at that moment, the way that the statute is drafted and created right now, a judge has to decide in that moment if you are eligible or not. If they do not determine and they say, no, you're not eligible for expungement, that's it.
Wow.
That's it.
So that's part of the actual court case. Like that's like part of the process.
It's part of sentencing.
Part of the sentencing. So that's part of the criteria of having a sentencing like model. Like you have to have that portion in there, or can it be left out somehow? Or
so meaning that like the judge stands silent and
yes.
Yeah. And I think, we've seen cases actually where judges will say, I reserve the right to decide on expungement, or I stand silent, or I'm not going to comment as to expungement. And that doesn't trump the statute, the way that the statute is written and interpreted. So it has to be articulated that they find that in fact you are eligible for expungement. So
if you pull a record up and you find that a judge stood silent, it's not a case you can take.
No, I mean it wouldn't be eligible for expungement. Yeah, and those are very frustrating. The other
I'm using the wrong language. I'm sorry.
No. I mean the other things that have to be present is that the individual has to successfully complete their sentence. So they have to complete either their sentence jail time or whatever prison time they may have been sentenced to, what out time or extended supervision and or probation has to be completed successfully. As the way the statute is written currently, 973.015 does not really define and really give a lot of parameters as to what does successful mean. So an individual can have a great success, do all of the ordered conditions and therapies and different things upon their sentencing that they have to do during their during their probation. But if there's still restitution that's still owed, or if there is still court costs, or if there are still things that maybe the judge ordered that the individual obtain a GED or a high school equivalency degree, and that isn't achieved, that would be noted by the probation officer that wasn't accomplished. And there's been the determination that person then hasn't successfully completed their probation. So, it's
always something, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very, it's really disheartening a lot. And I talk to a lot of folks on the phone. I get a lot of calls from people, and I'm okay with that because, again, you need to have somebody, one, that you trust,
Yep.
and it helps to know that somebody actually cares.
This is true. This is true.
Yeah. But it is. I do a lot of looking on my phone, but looking late at night and calling someone back and saying, what, this is what I see. But always giving hope. And I suppose in giving hope, I always have hope that the statute 973.015 will be amended and that a new statute will be adopted only because I think, age isn't really a good barometer of somebody's success, somebody's ability to have future successes. I mean, I think that that's extremely limiting, and it's we're one of the only states in the country that has an age requirement that's so strict. Similarly, I believe we are the only state in the nation now that requires the judge to articulate it at sentencing.
Jeez.
Yeah. So what's the significance of expungement, right? So expungement seals the record. So if you were to go into the clerk of court's office in Milwaukee and say, hey, I want to find out about this case, here's the person's name, here's the date of birth, or here's the case number, the clerk would go get the case and you could look at it. Reporters can do it. Anybody can do it.
It's public record.
Public record. So in the case of expungement, however, when a person is granted expungement, the file is literally taped shut. It is sealed. And to get into that file, you would have to break the seal, or you would have to get a court order that allows for the breaking of that seal for somebody to go in and retrieve the documents that are contained within that file. So it is, with regards to an expungement, it's off of CCAP. So people can't see it on
like a pardon where you can still go in and see.
But it has the pop-up page.
Yeah.
So that's a main difference between a expungement and a pardon. Similarly, expungement doesn't necessarily reinstate your civil rights. So you still can receive an expungement and not necessarily have your Second Amendment or any other civil right basically reinstated for yourself.
Sounds like that word should be changed because expunge is like destroy, get rid of.
Yeah.
Like tape up. Tape up seems like kind of like
we're gonna tape it, put it over here.
Don't touch that.
right. This doesn't exist over here.
Right. We don't see
you
it.
can't see me.
Right.
Yeah.
It, the whole idea of it, before you said that, I was like, I thought it was gone.
Like it's still incinerated or something.
It's still there.
Yeah.
It's just hidden over there in the dust.
Yeah.
And the only thing that's keeping it is a seal.
Yeah.
There's a piece of Scotch tape. A little piece of tape over.
I mean, I know a lot of like criminals who could probably get that seal off and put it right back.
Well, one thing that we had seen in the expungement pardon clinic, and sometimes it will come up, is individuals who I refer to them as the unicorn, where they are not only eligible for expungement, but they are eligible for a pardon. And
wow.
Yeah, and that's really interesting because there is a specific way you would want to address that type of situation. And it'll become much clearer once I fully define pardon, but you would want to get the expungement first, but you would want to take everything out of that file and get it certified. You have to get a certified copy of everything. 3 documents, and I can explain what those are, but you would want to get all of that done in preparation for your pardon, knowing though that it's probably the better move to go ahead and execute on the expungement first, especially if it's granted. And if, if the stars aligned, go for the expungement first, because again, pardon's a long game, as you know personally.
Yeah.
So they're not it's very rare. But when you're able to find them, it's actually really exciting to see individuals that actually have sort of double pathways to getting things off of their record after a period of time. So you asked, the difference between expungement and pardon. And I know oftentimes they're interchanged because it really gets to the heart of, this thing that happened to me,
Yep.
this
Yep.
mark on my name, I would like it off. And when looking at a pardon, the criterion there is that it has to be a felony. So you cannot pardon misdemeanors. You can have misdemeanors pardoned if the misdemeanor was decided, i.e. sentence resolved at the same time as the felony, and the misdemeanors, basically the judgment of conviction for the misdemeanor is also in the same judgment of conviction and attached to the felony. So sometimes what will happen in court, they'll consolidate, a misdemeanor will trail along with a felony. Or even in the same criminal complaint, there'll be a felony and then, a misdemeanor disorderly conduct or something. And those misdemeanors can be expunged because they are part and parcel of the same case. So that's how a pardon can touch upon misdemeanors. But standing alone, a pardon doesn't go, to a misdemeanor conviction. So again, misdemeanors, your best chance of getting those in some form or fashion, again, not removed from your name completely, but would be the expungement. So it has to be a felony for a pardon. You have to have completed your sentence, and there has to be, I always say, this is how I explain it to folks, has to have at least 5 years since your foot touched a sentence. So as soon as you walked off of papers, the day that you have your discharge letter, the date is that you are done with probation or extended supervision, that day starts the clock ticking
For 5 years.
At a minimum.
Which is, and I think we've talked about this, and not to jump in because I definitely wanted to go through the process of the pardon, but it's one of the things that's really disheartening when you think about, and that's here specifically in Wisconsin. There's different laws in different states. The federal law is different, but it's super disheartening to think you have to wait till 5 years after you're off paper or after you're off a sentence, because so many people do great things 3 or 4 years after they've been to prison, right? Some people serve 25 years in prison. They're not going back, but they don't have the opportunity because of the way the law is written. So the law is written, definitely for those of you listening out there that want to change some laws, let's look at this pardon law, and let's look at, what the statute and how it's set up and how we can make sure the individuals are getting opportunities, because it is, for some people, it's a lifesaver to get it taken off. I mean, you shouldn't have to wait 25, 30 years if you're doing the things you're going to do. And there's data out there that shows after a certain amount of time, you're like, it almost goes to zero of your chance of going back to prison. So, I don't know. That's for a whole nother, as we think about advocacy, it's really big. It's a conversation me and Ken have really talked about, was like, how do you change that? How do you make sure individuals get those opportunities? Because it just doesn't seem right that you have to wait that long. I know the pundits that'll listen will say, well, you shouldn't have committed a crime in the first place. Cool, I got you, right? I totally understand that. But now that we're here, how do we get it where individuals can get access to those opportunities?
Yeah. Well, and again, the pardon is an executive order, and it stems out of Executive Order 30, which was one of the first executive orders that Governor Evers put in place when he became the Wisconsin state governor. Because again, before that, in the previous administration, there was never a pardon advisory board, call it the PAB. The pardon advisory board wasn't even, assembled. So there wasn't a place to really even mail your petition, your pardon petition to, because
hey, Mr. Governor, can I get pardoned?
Go right to him.
Right.
So, I was very happy and elated to learn that it was clearly something that means a lot to our current governor, because it was one of the first enactments that he effectually did. Similarly, I'll explain, in Executive Order 130, what that order did was it allowed for an expedited review. So for applications that the felony that is asked or requested, or felonies now too as well, more than one felony asked to be pardoned, could be expedited and wouldn't have to necessarily go in front of a pardoning advisory board for a full hearing if it was a nonviolent offense and quite frankly, that it could just go straight to the governor's desk, and it can still. They have this. They're doing this actually.
We actually had Jock. Remember Jock Phoenix? Jock Phoenix was on, and he said one day he submitted all the paperwork, and he heard nothing, and all of a sudden he got a letter in the mail that said you were pardoned.
That's
so.
wild.
And it is. I was like, man, I wish that had happened to me. I worked in state government,
Yeah.
and I still had to sit in front of folks. But yeah, when he shared that story, it was like I never met anybody that literally they just got the letter in the mail and said you're pardoned.
Slick, right?
Yeah,
I
it's
mean,
perfect.
Isn't there like data? There's got to be data like in this whole metrics, and people are like going through like numerical data to find that within the first 5 years of release, how many formerly incarcerated people have actually turned their life around faster, so that can kind of reduce the amount of time. It's got to be a lot of numbers out there to show that it can be reduced at this point, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's specific data on that, but I certainly know that when you look at the roster of those that have received pardons, I mean, there are individuals who have their crimes were convicted and like they were convicted in like the 70s or 80s,
70s, 80s, 90s,
and they're currently currently receiving their pardons and may have had to go to a hearing, may not have had to go to a hearing. Before I get back to the criteria, because again, for the eligibility, it's really important. But I just
want to kind of go off.
That's okay. That's okay.
Go off the charts a little bit.
But
it's Can's fault. We've been in Can.
I just drive us off the road sometimes.
It's all good.
It's a good ride.
I drive a Jeep.
It's interesting because I think the last report was that Governor Evers' Pardon Advisory Board had granted 1,111 pardons. I think that was released end of November, possibly December. And in that release, that press release, I think that round he had pardoned 82 people within that time period, which would be if it were like a month or 2 months. And I think about like your journey. And I remember, clearly watching your pardon hearing. I remember watching a lot of people's pardon hearings. And, it is just remarkable just to think of the volume of people that could also get it.
Yeah.
Even in light of the fact that 1,111 have gotten it. I think of all of the individuals who may not have ever considered it. Or you talked about in the past, which I think is really true, there is a psychological effect and fallout that happens. I always would tell clients there is a punishment in going through the process. And I would sometimes argue that in court when I would ask for a minimal sentence or, explain that there's an alternative here that's deserving. This is why. And so I think of the journey that people take, and I know because they've shared it with me, because it's not my lived experience, but it is something that I have seen so many come and share out that I thought about this. I thought I was going to be this in my life. I wanted to do this. I had this dream, and then I went over here. And I sometimes, my mind goes back to that, but then I'm reminded with like a heavy feeling in my stomach that, oh yeah, I can't ever do that. I'm not deserving, and it gets internalized.
It does.
And so I actually always have believed that going through the pardon application with individuals is a very delicate, a very sensitive, and a very important time where each question, as you know, elicits taps in to a different side of what you've been rolling through.
You all know and love our premier alkaline water that's wrapped in sustainable packaging. Well, welcome the new kids on the block. Our watermelon mint and elderberry lemonade are packed with vitamins. It's great tasting and refreshing without the artificial flavors and colors. Life's confusing enough. Let's be clear.
It really does. And to hear it from your perspective, like you get it. And it's so funny because you get it. You've never had to go through the process, but you've gone through the process way more times than I ever had. I did it once. You've done it probably hundreds of times in going through in those emotions that up and down. And it is the application I mean, it asks you, I think, twice, like basically, why do you want a pardon? I mean, it asks you like straight out, why do you want it? But then there's another part where I believe it asks, what have you done since your release? And, what are your, I forgot the exact question, how they ask it, but that was one of the
There
hardest.
are different variations of why do you think you need this?
Yeah, basically like,
Why are you deserving?
yeah, what you want? Why are you here? Like that kind of stuff. Like, I'm here because I want a pardon.
It's like the 5 whys, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
Why? But why?
Exactly. And
One more
it's
time. Why?
right.
yeah. And when you're looking and you're filling it out, you're questioning, is it like one of those psychological tests, like trying to catch me up of, well, this really isn't why. But it's tough. It's so hard. I'll be honest. It was one of the hardest things I did. And which is why when I made that phone call to you, like, I'm going,
Yeah.
I talked about this on my episode, the first episode we did. I got the pardon paperwork on my birthday. And I was like, I'm doing it. I was off for 5 years. I was like, that's it. I'm going to make it happen. This was in 2020. Got it on my birthday. Didn't turn it in it was a year. It was almost a year before I turned it in.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because it's tough. It's when you look at that, you really have to explain yourself. So that's why I've always been appreciative. Like when I found out the work you're doing, I was like, man, this is great. Like I didn't, thankfully I didn't have to tap into you for that, but I was able to tap into you when I needed you the most, which was like, all right, I got all this stuff I want to say. Like this is all this stuff. And you're like, all right, do this, categorize this, put it here, and make it flow.
And we still haven't gotten to the definition of a pardon.
Oh, yeah, I know, right?
But I still wanted to say how all the work you did to get the pardon and explain why you were deserving of it, I believe prepared you for life after it, so that nobody can throw anything at you that hurts.
True.
There's nothing that hurt because
Yeah.
that year that it took for you to send it in was part of you accepting the fact that this was everything that you did and you do deserve it, and there's nobody who can take that away from you.
Well, and that's a really good point, because I think there are people. So just shifting the light off of me, there are people who it's a tough. Like you have to sit there and you have to bear your own. There's still people 20, 30 years after they got out of prison that still have not owned the fact that they did what they did. Like when I talk to people, they reach out to me like, I want to fill out, do a pardon. Number one question, why do you want a pardon? I ask them straight out, why you want a pardon? And when they tell me, I'm like, that's a bad excuse. Like, no, that's a bad reason, not excuse. That's a bad reason. What do you mean? Well, it sounds like at the end of the day, you just want it because of X, Y, Z. And it also sounds like you're not taking accountability for what you did.
But some of that stuff is also guilt.
Oh, 100%. And that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's the part of like when you're reading through that and writing in there, that's what makes it so tough, because you're reliving now that time and you're like,
there's a lot of remorse and guilt.
Yeah,
I'm sure that
remorse,
emotion.
guilt,
And when you
shame.
said the stuff that you've been through, you go through that over and over and over, hearing people. I mean, I'm just wondering how much that absorbs into your emotion.
Yeah, carry with what
Yeah,
you
what do you take home and what do you leave behind you?
Yeah, I mean, I've had a couple years to work on those boundaries, but yeah, I mean, there have been cases. I mean, I'll be honest, watching the Pardon Advisory Board, and you're moved to tears. I mean, there are some stories that you hear, if I helped them or not, and it's gut wrenching when somebody bears. Again, I thought this was going to be my life, but then this happened. I take responsibility for it, or they just lay it out there, and it's a humbling experience, and it's a strip down with regards to you have to go to it with accepting of responsibility. If you claim innocence, or if you state that you are still not guilty of it,
right? You can hang it up.
Yeah,
you ain't getting that part.
No, it really is something where it has to align with you addressing it internally and settling with it. In that, like you mentioned, there's individuals who've done their entire sentence, still struggling with that, and I can understand that. And so when I've had individuals who have come to me that are in that scenario, it's a hard discussion.
Yeah, it is.
But it's one that is so worth having, because
is.
it's another opportunity that I see for an individual who's reaching out in that moment in a system that's already disenfranchised them. And if I don't take the time, and if I don't explain the why in a very patient and calm, very explicit way so that,
Mhm.
you know, it's just not, it's not good for the community. It's not good for
Right.
anybody if
Right.
somebody just, you know, they reach out and they feel that they've been dejected and also turned away from what they thought was something that they were eligible for. Getting back to the eligibility. Did you see that? Did you see that?
That's
That was a
Very
good
Check it
segment.
out.
Good
You're
segment.
welcome.
You do this for a living.
So again, it has to be a felony conviction in the state of Wisconsin. I've had individuals who have called and approached, and I've spoken to who, you know, have something in Illinois that's really what they want to get off, and they're now living here in Wisconsin. It really is something that then I can refer folks
Back
down
to
to
them.
down to Illinois, that they've got a system and a process as well. So it's very much state, you know, jurisdiction. Again, this isn't federal, so it's really state. The governor, you know, can only pardon individuals that were convicted in the state. Again, 5 years post the end of the sentence, it has to be fully completed. And then you don't have any current pending criminal offenses. So,
Gotcha.
yeah. And then you also are somebody who is currently not subject to sex offender registry. So if you have, as part of your sentence, the requirement that you report annually for 15 years or the rest of your life, you are not
You're not
eligible
eligible.
for a pardon. I will share that Executive Order 130 also brought about an opportunity for folks to kind of reset the clock. So if the way the executive order was drafted, for a while there were folks that were saying, well, do I apply, you know, should I apply, should I not apply? You would complete your sentence, and in that 5-year interim, let's say you pick up a misdemeanor, what would that mean, right?
Yeah.
So with Executive Order 130, what happened was it lended us clarity to understand that you can step off of your sentence, and within that 5-year time period, let's say you pick up a misdemeanor of disorderly conduct or something, a lower level misdemeanor, that 5 years starts then, but you still can go forward. You know what I mean? It's not a true impediment such that you wouldn't, oh, I got a misdemeanor, now I'm blocked to get relief on a felony.
Right.
So that's definitely helpful. And again, the difference between an expungement and pardon, a pardon reinstates on individual civil rights, namely, in certain cases, your right to be on a ballot, your right to hold certain elected offices, as well as the Second Amendment, your right to bear arms. I think when you mentioned actually, you know, oh, that's not a good answer. I'll just share out that, you know, writing or articulating in front of the board or in any fashion that I want to get a pardon because I want to have my Second Amendment, or I want to, you know, carry a gun, is never really looked at truly favorably. However, I have heard individuals state that and state it in a very, you know, heartfelt way that it's a family tradition to go hunting, or that.
Yep.
You know,
I've heard that. I heard that numerous times. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, you know, best advice is that dig deep. There's probably something else that you see that could benefit yourself as well. So like dig deep, boys, you know, there's another.
It's not, I just want to go hunting, take my kids hunting.
It's hard to believe that would still be something that people would.
Well,
I know it's a right and you want to actually say it, but coming out of prison, that's not the first thing that you should be like having, you know, attention on. But
yeah,
me, I don't know. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, and again, I mean, time has passed too. So
right. And I'm not a gun advocate, so that's partly.
Yeah.
Like whatever. I don't care about a gun. I want to vote.
Right.
Yeah.
I want to work in a school. I want to, you know, all these different things that would, you know, impede upon me to not be done.
Right. Yeah. I mean, again, I see it as, and I've heard you state this, which I think is really well put. It's going full circle. It's closing that chapter. Yep. It's symbolic. Mm-hmm. It's internal. Mm-hmm. It's very internal. And I don't think you don't know it until you have carried that, that yoke of.
Yes.
I mean, truly, you know, just kind of in talking with you and working with you through, you know, your pardon journey. You know, you're extremely accomplished. And I'm sure people would say, why do you need one? You know, and when that question gets posed, or why do you feel
Right.
you need one? Again, it's someone who's coming probably from an angry or
Right.
malignant way. It's just they just don't
Like,
understand.
what you need a pardon for? Like, I needed to get a job. What are you doing this, and
Yeah.
you're able to do this, but it's an internal question too. I mean, it's a
Yeah.
question I have my wife. It's like, well, why do I need this? Like, I've done everything I'm doing. It's not impeding me. Why do I want this? And that was like a soul searching thing for me, because I did have to find, like, why do I really? I'm just doing this just because I can. Or do I really want this? And that's when I figured out, like, yeah, this allows me to close that chapter in my life. No matter what I've done, if I don't close the chapter, I don't care whatever I would do in my life, that chapter is still open. And I think for a lot of people, they unfortunately don't get to that point of like, it's just closure of a chapter. They're more of like, I need this pardon because I want to be able to move forward. I want to be able to get a job. I don't want, I don't want the shame that comes with it. Whereas me, it's just like, I just want to close this chapter and let it be done and over with.
Mhm.
Yeah. And there's a lot of folks that I've talked to that have said, you know, I've hidden it. I hide it. And I've talked, that's interesting, because when I've spoken with those individuals, the folks that have, and all right, very successful or have, you know, gone on with their lives, but it's hidden. It comes up often when I'll talk to them about their letters of recommendation, which I would encourage everyone to always submit a letter of recommendation.
You heard it here.
Yeah.
You heard it here
Do
from
that.
Megan.
Yeah.
You hear, I always talk about it. I talk about it all the time.
Yeah.
And I've talked about it on the shows. It's just so important, those letters of recommendation, to talk about your character. Because those individuals that are sitting up there that are reviewing your file, they have no clue who you are. They're going to go based off of what they see on paper. And that paper needs to be the bad things that you did and the good things that people say about you. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, it's a good point. It's another lens. It's someone who is looking at you from the outside in.
Mhm.
You can speak from the inside out, right? But it'll often come up when I'll talk to folks about, okay, so if you had to pick 2 or 3 people right now, who would you say they could write a letter for me?
Yep.
They know me, they
Yep.
see me, they live through this experience with me, and you know, or they've seen me at my worst and they know me now. So that's also a powerful story. But for the folks that are like, well, nobody, because if I ask them for the letter and
They'll
I'm
know.
outing myself
Yeah.
and letting them
Because
know,
they've hidden.
they've hidden it,
Yeah.
right? So those are tricky cases. Those are tricky circumstances where it really, there's some unique ways that you can phrase it on the application to state this is why this, and I recognize this is important. This is why this is
But
lacking.
this is why I don't want to
Yeah.
do it. Yeah.
So there's that, but it's one of those things too that, and you've probably heard this as well, the Pardon Advisory Board, they don't want to hear from a lawyer.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like they don't want to hear me. They don't want to hear any lawyer. They don't want to hear someone in that moment,
Yeah.
believe it or not, advocating for you. They want to hear you share out
Yep.
and advocate
100%.
for yourself and come to the hearing ready to engage and speak about what happened,
Mhm.
how it affected you, where you are now, and where you want to go.
Yeah.
So they don't want to hear from a lawyer. Sometimes in some hearings, you'll see like the person will be in their lawyer's law office, which is totally fine. No, totally fine. And the Pardon Advisory Board will know that you're in your lawyer's
recognize
office.
it, yeah.
And they'll recognize the
They'll
office.
see
or
the
maybe
bar up there.
well,
They
I don't know.
pass the bar. You'd be like, oh, really?
Yeah. And there's a portion on the pardon application that says, was this pardon filled out by another? Were you assisted?
Yeah.
So there's that where, the Pardon Advisory Board will understand and see that in fact this was, had some assistance from a lawyer, and that's okay. But I think part of the process of walking someone through the 11-page document is really letting them know that this is sort of the groundwork to get you to the place where
Yeah.
your voice is the most important in the room.
100%. And I think that's the thing too. Like, a couple pressing things that I think about here is, the importance of the process and going through the process and not being scared of the process. But then the second most important part is just being ready, right? Being prepared when you walk in there virtually, and if they ever get back to in person, which I doubt they will, but virtually, that you're ready with why you've earned a pardon. And I always tell people that it's not that I deserve, it's I've earned this and how I work towards that. So thinking about that, like, can you share one or two like really good success stories of individuals that you've walked, like that you've seen them go through the process, like some dynamic stories that, you know, people may not believe, like, wow, I couldn't believe a person that did something like that could get pardoned or something.
Yeah. There's always one this one story, this one gentleman who stands out in my mind. There's been a few since then, but he was an individual. I don't know if I want to like say his name, only because like,
no, that's fine. You don't have to say
it's not my story.
Yeah,
I
no,
feel
it's
like
perfectly
it's really
fine.
not my, you know, it's, but he was
You can tell me afterwards because we might reach out to him, have him come on the Pardon Me
That actually might
podcast.
be great.
We're always looking for new guests on the Pardon Me
Yeah.
podcast.
He's wonderful. He was at an event. He was at a Coffee Makes You Black.
Okay.
There was an event there. And I was speaking with others from actually the Pardon Advisory Board and folks from Legal Action. And so it was a panel discussion where individuals could ask the Pardon Advisory Board questions, certain questions, i.e. legal questions that they probably don't want to tell or give the answer to, because then it would be them giving advice or, you know what I mean?
Right.
So you don't want to, so create, you know, recognizing those guardrails, right?
Yeah.
It was myself and another attorney. And there was a gentleman who was in a 3-piece suit. He was just very dressed up, looked great, you know, long, you know, trench coat, hat, very dapper. And so immediately, you know, you kind of, oh, this man is here. He's present, you know?
Right.
And he was just, you could tell he was intently listening. He was listening to every word. If I had an opportunity to answer a question, you could tell he was engaged. And then after the panel disbanded and we were, you know, getting our coats on and everything, he came up and had just, not apologetically, but just very politely had asked, would you mind reading my pardon? I came here I have it here. This is my pardon. And it was like in a manila envelope. It was like an accordion kind of manila envelope. He had everything, like he was carrying it around, and you could tell it had been, you could tell it had been heavy, and you could tell he had been carrying it, right?
Wow.
And the symbolic gesture of just physically carrying it, having it with him on his lap throughout the whole discussion while this is swirling around him. And then he came up to me afterwards, and I was like, oh man, yeah, you know, I mean, there was no way. I'm like, yeah, we're in it now. So
yeah.
Let's have a seat. And so he and I did, we sat, we talked, I got his number. He got my number. We ended up, going through it and becoming close. And he ended up eventually, and again, much like you, very successful individual. He actually lives down in Illinois area now, and, you know, has really built a life for himself, but was very much in athletics and coaching and wanted to continue in coaching, and found that having a felony conviction on his record often created difficulty for him to give. He was really committed to youth and really helping out young individuals, young men that could see themselves in him. He wanted to support, and found that he could best do it on the basketball coach, but found that like anytime he tried, this was always something that was
always
swirling.
Hung over his head. That's
Right,
always going to be
swirling
hung
around.
over his head.
So that whole carrying, it is literally carrying
it's
it.
a literal carrying.
Wow.
So he and I became close, and he was eventually granted his pardon.
Nice.
And it was amazing. And we ended up throwing him a party and, you know, really celebrating that, because you know, they have drug treatment courts. There's certain things that do get celebrated in the court system. But I think there's a missed opportunity when like expungements should be celebrated in the courtroom. Pardons, you know, the gentleman who, you know, God, you know, more power to him. His case was expedited. And then one day he's looking through the variety mail, like junk. And then he comes across state of Wisconsin, and he opens it up, and it's his pardon. To me, when you said that, I was just like, oh, it's jarring, because
exactly.
Yeah. Like you want there to, not that you're looking for any type of ceremonial gesture, but like it should be it's a missed opportunity, I think, for
Agreed.
sometimes the justice system to not celebrate some of these events.
No, I
because-
agree.
The parallels to what I'm doing right now are phenomenal. I am in my dissertation stage of my doctorate,
He's the doctor.
The doctorate, yeah.
and walking around with I do carry my dissertation around me. I have it. I mean, now it's electronic and stuff, but all my files and stuff I have, all my articles and whatever. And then having somebody read it, it's very similar. Like, can you read my dissertation?
Yes.
You're really opening up and letting somebody chop your life up. That's your
Listen to my demo.
right, literally.
You listen to my demo tape for me, please.
And then the anticlimactic, all right, I'm done. Now what? Kind of thing. All right, I want to celebrate. It's very similar. It's funny how life
that is a
so
crazy
many,
parallels.
Yeah.
That is a crazy parallel to think about.
Are there what role does the nature and the severity of a person's case play in a part? Does that still have a in the back of the mind of the pardon board? Do you think does that play a role in whether or not that's something they grant?
Are you asking, just for clarity, are you asking if it is a crime or the circumstances of the offense are extraordinary, horrific?
Because we've seen obviously mine was violent armed robbery. And we've seen all the way down to Joe, who came on the show, was bail jumping. Yeah. So it's
man.
that was.
But then we got one who was convicted several times of drugs.
Yes.
And got pardoned. There's some people are I don't even know why you got pardoned.
And he's the one, and Jacques is the one who he got it in the mail, right? So it's
right.
How did you even go through that process? Yeah, how did that?
Escape?
And he even said,
he went to the story. He'd been in prison 3-4 times for the same offense. And I was it seemed like a pardon board was all right, buddy.
Yeah, I mean, I am in no position.
There's no rhyme or reason. It's just
to say what the pardon board had, thought in that moment. But I mean, there have been cases that are they've been extremely impactful to the community, to others, and they are still granted a pardon. I mean, I believe that is equitable. It's fair. It's justice. It's and I don't think that they are because again, the folks that are on the pardon board, and you probably have shared out on this before, they're professionals who have been in and around the criminal justice system or have been in some type of community service, usually in supporting individuals through AODA or some type of advocacy of folks who may be justice impacted. So I think, again, with that professional lens, looking at the pardon application, the supportive documentation, it's taken case by case. I mean, most literally, it's case by case.
But it's cool to hear that it's not something that's going to impede.
Yeah, I mean, the eligibility states that as it's related to a type of offense, the only thing that's articulated is that it cannot be something that requires you to register as a sex offender, because again, if you're still a registrant, you're ineligible. So, it's one thing that I do know that they do take into great consideration. The victims are notified, and they are also able to provide a statement either via writing or if they wish to show up.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so there are pardon hearings that there's a dual voice in the room, right? The individual who's the petitioner will, certainly go first. They will have an opportunity to go through the full pardon hearing. Because it's now virtual, sometimes they know, sometimes they don't know that in fact,
you're gonna be up there,
on the line is the individual who is listed as the victim or somebody who has an interest in the case at the time. They are here and they have every right to also present their thoughts, feelings, and perspective as to the individual receiving the pardon. There's also been times where I've seen the individual who was listed or named as the victim come in support of the pardon being
really?
granted. Yeah. So it again,
Mm.
it's a case by case.
Yeah.
It's so specific to the person, the time, what they lived through. I think one thing that you can look at these questions as sort of like drilling questions of like, why do you deserve a pardon? What did you do since then? It to really be able to flesh it out is also saying, this is the context in which this offense that brings me here today, this is the context that was going on. So I always ask individuals to really think about what was going on around your life when this happened, because that's a way to tell a story.
It's a way to write the story. Yeah.
It is. And it's a narrative that I think lends itself where you're still answering the question of what did you do, but you're feathering in context. I don't even want to say reasoning, because sometimes there was no reason to it, but it was still a factor, but you can't maybe you
Agreed.
still can't articulate it. But I think it's painting the picture. It's telling that story. And really being honest about the environment that you were in. And I think that when you can read that, you see that the person has truly embraced themselves, saw themselves, and saw themselves currently. They look back and reflect, but that in the moment, this is where I was, why I was here, and this was the pinnacle. A decision came to me, and you know what?
Yeah.
I went that way.
Yeah. I would agree. And as I think about as our time starts to come to a close here, there's two pressing things that I want to ask. I don't know if you have anything, but one of the things I want to ask is I want to kind of flip them, because I want to close out on like your advice for somebody that's thinking about seeking a pardon or wants to apply, like and what are the barriers that individuals may face. But thinking about like these Senate bills, there's some things that are floating around right now that could change the landscape of things that are going on. Would you be willing to talk about that a little bit, about what's kind of floating around out there?
Yeah. So there have been very dedicated lawmakers who have been working for a very, very long time in crafting a new expungement law. Basically refining it to be contemporary and in line with the reality that we really all know to be so. When you really look at the statute, you're like, gosh, there's a whole cohort of people that just by virtue of age get caught up.
Right.
So it would get rid of the age requirement. It would still allow for the judge to have a say in the person getting a pardon, but it would be after they would complete their sentence for, not a pardon, I'm sorry, for expungement. Let me correct that. For expungement, they would complete their sentence. Then a year after the completion of that sentence, they could petition the court for expungement, basically it is to effectuate the order of expungement. And the judge at that time can hold a hearing, and that would give the person a platform. Again, I think of ceremony to some extent, but that would give the person an opportunity to feel and be present in the moment, so that it's not just denied and you're left there kind of, struck. And it would also be applied retroactively, and individuals can apply more than once. So let's say you go to the hearing, and again, this is if the law were to change, you would go to the hearing and let's say you're denied. Okay, you would then have to wait a certain time period, and then you could apply again, but you would have to pay $100. So there would be a court filing fee. Right now, there isn't a court filing fee because you're asking the court to just continue with the effectuation of that order from the judgment of conviction. That's the way the statute's written now. They define what success is. So there's a definition of what does it mean to be successful in completing your probation or completing your sentence, and what is not, rather than it being ad hoc and determined,
arbitrary basis.
Yeah.
That's successful. That ain't success.
Yeah. And the other thing that would go into effect is that, part of the the bill, it's Senate Bill 38, is that it's really anchored in employment. That they really make it clear that an expunged case can't be used, or it's discrimination to ask the person,
Smart.
well, go and just tell me about it. What happened? Or give me
Yeah.
something, do you have a copy of the complaint or something like that? It would also not go. So right now it's really open wide. Statute 973.015 it hasn't defined what convictions apply and don't, but the new draft of the bill would carve out traffic cases. So I'm thinking like OWIs, stuff like that, carved out traffic cases that involve criminal trespass to businesses, as well as criminal damage to property if the property belonged to a business, as well as any violation of a domestic abuse injunction restraining order. So they're putting up guardrails and lifting up, here are the parameters of what we will entertain as being expungible. And I think that also, with that clarity and being precise,
will help out.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So it's good when it's
It's good when it's clear.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
a basic understanding of like, this is what it looks like.
Yeah. So, but we will see. I think, again, the pardon is executive order. So if it were to change, it would have to come
Through the governor's
yeah,
office.
through some type of, decided change there. But
it's definitely something that we want to focus on and continue to build advocacy
Mhm.
around, is thinking about bringing individuals on here who really have changed and done some things. Like, it's just, is there a process, or is there something that could be more defined?
Yeah.
Right? Maybe there can be some definition that gets a little more crisper about eligibility for a pardon, that gets a little crisp. I know when you get crisp, that means that there's people who are on the cusp, right? Who are
Yeah.
like, well, I'm not
Mhm.
there. But I think it also helps and lends to the majority of individuals who may, after they get out, really are being successful and really do need that opportunity. And that leads to you did the air quotes on me.
Successful.
Yeah, there it is. Exactly.
Right,
What
right.
success is
What does that
arbitrary
mean?
to
Right.
everybody, right? What does it really
Right.
mean? What does it mean to folks? But as we think about, Megan, if taking yourself back to your pardon clinic days, what is the best advice that you could give someone who may be listening to the show right now, or someone who is listening to the show and they're going to give advice to their loved one or somebody they know about going through the process for a pardon?
Yeah. I think a lot of people will say, I wouldn't get it. They will just intrinsically and, introspectively think it's not for me. You don't know until, quite frankly, you go through the eligibility standards and the criteria, and you really examine, actually, I think I may be eligible. I think keeping that open mind. The other piece of advice, so approach it. Don't be afraid to approach it, to explore it, to see if it is something. Second piece of advice that I still do. I give this advice out often, and you will appreciate this. It is an 11-page application, right? That requires a lot of supportive documentation. It asks a lot of really deep dive questions that when you read them, you want to answer them completely. So don't try and fill it out in one sitting. It really is something that you have to do a bit of introspective gaze. You got to walk with it for a while, sit
Makes
with
sense.
it, look at it, and be kind to yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the other thing, is like, be kind to yourself in going through a process that is going to unearth a lot of things that you probably have hidden and that you have probably tried to turn around from. You have to directly look at it, because you have to directly communicate it. And the way they ask you to communicate it is also through typing, or you can handwrite it. So you can handwrite it, or you can type it. They will not deny or turn away a pardon just because of it's handwritten. But it be kind to yourself when you're thinking about doing it. And this is true in speaking with individuals, you are your worst critic. You are so hard on yourself.
I live that every day of my life. I live
Yeah.
that.
That's right.
I'm my worst critic.
Yeah, and we give so much grace to others. We give so much leeway. We give so much forgiveness to others. But if you think about it, and I am the worst offender of this. I don't even know why, but it's true. And so I share that with people who contact me and say, hey, I'm thinking I'd like to get a pardon, and this is what happened to me and everything. And I don't think, I don't know. And I'm like, well, let's figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's best to know.
Well, I love that. Those are 3+1 keys, approach it, second, take your time, really digest it, be kind to yourself. And part of that, be kind, give yourself some grace in there.
Yeah.
I think those are 3+1 solid pieces of advice. And I think as I hear you, it's something that I also, once you say it, that's kind of how it was for me as well, like that introspection. And shout out to the homie Max L, because I wrote it and I had to send it to him. And I was like, man, I'm writing this from my perspective. And he said, your perspective is good, but you're not telling the story. So I think taking that time to really get introspective and to really sit down with it and live it, because you are going to have to, if you do get called, you are going to have to share what you wrote. You're going to have to tell that same story again. And if it's not real, I tell people, if that's not real, then when you get in front of the cameras, you're not going to be real.
Yeah.
So whatever you're saying is going to have to be the same thing. It's going to have to be, this is really who you are.
So you're really telling the story in the absence of you physically being present, basically.
Correctly.
You have to tell the story so that they don't have to ask any questions. But you still have to present it once you get there. Kind of thing.
Yeah. Like you have to narrate your story, but also be prepared to be peppered with questions.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And then if you don't get hit with a question, still be like,
I know. And then you're wondering, well,
what did I do wrong? Yeah.
Right.
But you do have to be ready.
Yeah. Yeah. Did they not like what I said?
Yeah, exactly. It's like the silence is deafening.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's and be ready to answer those questions, because that's when you get hit with the questions that you're like, so we looking at this, and now you have to be like kind of on. So that's great advice. And this has been, Megan, this has been one of my favorite shows.
Absolutely.
Like you are,
Thanks.
You're a beacon of hope in that, like from talking all the way back to the Innocence Project days, all the way back to deciding you wanted to be a lawyer and deciding that you wanted to get in and help people really move their lives forward. And that some of those folks are in a position where they can't do it without the help of others. So I want to continue to say thank you and definitely, show my appreciation for you as well. All the work that you've done, all the hard work that you will continue to do in connection to pardons, in connection to expungements, in connection to the work you do at Goodwill. It's great seeing you last year down at our national conference we had. Yeah, down in New Orleans, in DC this year.
I saw that.
But I can't tell you enough how much I appreciated the assistance you gave me. It's understated how much calm you brought to me when I did call, and I was like, okay, this is where I'm at.
Yeah.
And I shared it with you, and you really helped me map it out to tell it. And I tell people, when you watch my hearing, you can literally hear me, and it sounds like I'm just telling the story straight from the beginning to the end. And that's because I am. That's because I read it, and I was like, okay, here's my bullets, boom, 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 boom. So I want to say thank you for you helping me, but also thank you for the hundreds and thousands of others that you continue to help and that you have helped. It's appreciated. I want you to know that. So
thank you.
I appreciate also the fact that you are given a different narration with a public defender, especially in the city of Milwaukee, where there's some not negative connotation behind a public defender not being an advocate for the
there are fabulous public defenders.
Absolutely.
And advocates out
Absolutely.
there. No,
And just
sure.
making sure that people know that they exist and they're passionate and have been passionate since the beginning. So we thank you for that.
Yeah. And as we close out, one of the things I did once I got my pardon was I did the 27 toasts. And it wouldn't be right if I didn't bring you in to get in a toast. This is the 27+1, because you were there as part of the process, and you were that calming storm. So we're going to give a toast with our Be Clear water here.
Okay.
Proud sponsor of the Pardon Me podcast.
I'll pretend I have water.
Yeah. Tommy, he did drink, Cam Beast and drank it all up.
Yeah, thirsty. Oh, there's nothing left.
Oh, hold on.
That's how good it is. That's how good the water is. Megan, thank you. Thank you so much again for being a guest on the Pardon Me podcast. Cam Beats, as always, thanks for being over in the Pardon Me corner.
Me be a part of it. Appreciate it.
Thank you all for joining us today on this episode of Pardon Me podcast. Today, you heard a little bit different than what we normally do. Usually we have folks in here who are telling their success after receiving a gubernatorial or presidential pardon. Today, we're blessed with the opportunity to have someone in here who's helped individuals go through that process and to give us a little more insight into not only what that process looks like, but also the pains that are involved in that process and how to get through them, how to move past those pains so that you can get to the other side. What do workout folks say? No pain, no gain. In the same with the pardon process, there is no pain, no gain. You have to get through that process. And I want everybody to close out on those 4 things that Megan said. Great advice. Approach it. Be introspective. Sit down. Think about it. Be kind to yourself. And then lastly, give yourself some grace. Thank you again for joining us on the Pardon Me podcast. And always remember, failure is never an option.
Be clear.
For more information about specific pardon requirements and eligibility in your state, visit pardonme22.com and search under the Pardon Resources tab.
The mission of Pardon Me is to inform, motivate, and most importantly, humanize individuals who have made mistakes but have received gubernatorial and presidential pardons. Pardon Me is a brand for those who support second chances.